10:40. So now I'm like having a beer, and maybe I'll have another beer. And so I'm feeling pretty chill. But this is great. I'm so happy. Oh yeah, we're live. Okay, so we're back, and this is extremely exciting to be back for the final panel on this insane telethon. And I'm so happy that we got Harbinger board of director. It kind of got us back from Northern British Columbia. Hi, Kai. Good to see. Drew Ojajay, publisher of The Breach and executive director of Montreal's CUTV, legendary activist television station in Montreal. Hi, Drew.
Hello, hello.
Nice to see you. Nora Loreto back again after her totally incredible segment with Hillary Agro. Nice to see you, Nora, in Quebec City, and Rob Rousseau in Montreal. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Okay.
It's impossible for us to sleep, which is why I think we're all here right now. Only Kai is on Pacific time, and the rest of us are in Eastern time. And that's because we're so excited about this election. We're totally stoked. And
I just wanted to hang out for 12 whole hours and talk about it. It hasn't been enough. We need more, even more.
Well, we didn't actually touch on it in my segments too much, but then right at the end when I was speaking with Kai and Kevin Tagabon from the Hoser and Paris Marx, Kai actually started talking about the election, and then I was like, oh yeah, we should talk about this because I think there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of like real reasons to discuss the election. Christo and Andy did a great job of just like digging deep on lots of stuff. But Kai, can we pick up where we left off? You were, I think about to dive into just how we're living through a climate disaster, and it's not really registering in this election. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe I'll just tell a little story about the part of the world where I live. So, we just went through Canada's deadliest weather disaster in history. And it compounded with, this heat wave compounded with the other crises that we're facing because of the last several decades of neoliberalism in deadly ways. And so basically, when the heat wave hit, all the snow on the fucking mountains melted, which knocked out the water treatment plants because of all the sediment that was in the water. So the Wet'suwet'en people from the 2 police raids and the pipeline fight. So the biggest Wet'suwet'en village had their water treatment plant knocked out. And so people had no running water during the hottest days on record ever. So we're up near Alaska and it was like 40 degrees during the day. Nobody has air conditioning. Nobody's set up for this. And we have a housing crisis that is even worse on reserve and in rural communities than it is in Vancouver, where people are just like sleeping on each other's couches and in their cars and, totally inadequate housing. And so even if people wanted to follow public health advice, which was like, you'd have to find the Twitter feed where they said, oh, take a cold shower, or put a cold cloth on your head. You can't do that when you don't have any running water. And so people who could afford to took, rides into town and rented hotel rooms so they could use the fucking toilet. But everyone else just had to stick it out. So at the same time, we have this poison drug epidemic, right? Which is even worse in northern BC than it is in most of the suburbs around Vancouver. And so when people are extremely uncomfortable and in pain, or they're super bored, or they just use drugs every day because they need to, people don't stop using drugs because there's like a climate emergency. And so we had people dropping. We had 3 people overdose in one day in the village next to me. It's 600 people. And there were no fucking ambulances because all of the paramedics, the few paramedics we have left, and a lot of communities in northern BC, we don't even have 24-hour ambulance service. They were busy dealing with old people who were collapsing in the heat or who were just cooking in mobile homes or RVs or trailers. And so hundreds and hundreds of people died who didn't need to die. And the government, the response from our premier was, he said, quote, there's an element of personal responsibility in this. That basically he went full Margaret Thatcher on the like, you should have known that you were going to die if you didn't get to one of the government mandated cooling centers, which we didn't advertise. And then he said fatalities are a part of life. That was his like shrug, was okay, well, people die, so whatever. 800 people died. And who died? It was the people who had nobody to check on them. It was the people who were disabled or elderly, who lived alone, people who like the government doesn't give a fuck about, and they are betting on the fact that most people who voted for them don't care either. And so far, they've gotten away with it. Like nobody has taken them to task for this.
That attitude is like entirely identical to the right-wing response to COVID as well, right? Like, everyone, it's your own fault. It's your own personal responsibility.
Well, BC's response to COVID. I mean, Horgan's been the premier that has said the most that this is partying and personal responsibility that's led to workplace outbreaks rather than the fucking other way around.
Exactly. So anyway, that's like my 5-minute rant, but it's just, I'm trying to illustrate how all these things stack on top of each other.
Yeah.
They have extremely lethal consequences for real people, some of whom I know. And the response from policymakers is to like, not just ignore them, but to blame them for their own deaths. And so that's the attitude that I'm carrying into the federal election. And I'm looking for, you know, politicians or party leaders who have some grasp of this and are offering some kind of structural solution. And that's why it's been so frustrating, is because there's just fucking nothing on the table.
Yeah, and in the midst of the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. So Drew, can you pick up on that idea of sort of cascading and colliding crises all happening at the same time, and the and how it plays into it or doesn't play in a federal election?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the federal election, it's been, I mean, there's always this sort of parallel realities, I guess. It was really heartening, I think, to see the context of the debate on climate, or the debate really focused on climate, and I think that was a big in a lot of. I think there's some credit that goes to all the people who organized demos across the country on the first debate night, or the day of the first debate night, to really draw attention to the climate crisis, and that garnered some coverage, and I think got climate to be more of an issue in the debate, which is great. But then you see the liberals extremely skillful in sort of getting this whole lineup of sort of, you know, hack experts, but people with a lot of sort of mainstream cred, to line up and say, oh, the liberals' plan on climate is the best plan by far, you know, like just these unequivocal sort of endorsements of the liberals' climate plan. And it's as if the last 6 years just never happened. Like, it's as if these aren't the people who have been like maintaining fossil fuel subsidies, buying pipelines, finance, like facilitating the financing of fossil fuel, expansion, not meeting climate targets, ignoring everything. Like, I mean, just the list goes on, but it's like, and obviously, you know, arresting indigenous land defenders, blocking pipelines. Like, I mean, you've heard the litany, but the skill with which they're able to mobilize this sort of like mainstream media voices to say, like, despite all that, the liberals' plan is the best, and we can just, like, all that can just go down the memory hole, and we can maintain this bubble. And I think during the debate, it was really interesting to watch Justin Trudeau, because he was just doubling down nonstop. It was like, you're suing indigenous kids. No, we're not. Like, you're not meeting climate targets. Yes, we are. It's just like and I think it's like, it's very tempting. I mean, I was honestly, there's a part of my brain that I had to sort of like turn off and be like, because it kept cropping up and be like, maybe we're actually on target. Maybe I'm the asshole. Yeah, just like I'm the asshole. Because it's incredibly tempting to believe the people in charge have some kind of plan, have some kind of have thought it through, are actually taking action when it seems like they're not. And maybe I'm the one who's being cynical. Maybe cynicism, it really is the enemy of progressive movement.
This is why you can't listen. Yeah. You can't just listen to these politicians when they talk. It's like Satan. You have to understand that everything's a lie and go forward from that framework.
Yeah, but like gaslighting reality. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Trudeau, that's what you point out. He's great at this. He's a great at, even though despite his record, despite everything, he's a guy that can go and just lie right to your face. And just, you know, as in like a normal human being who's not used to just like being that deceitful, and then, you know, you naturally just look at that and be like, hey, this guy doesn't seem so bad, you know. That's your normal reaction. But like, that's how insidious this shit is. And it's true. It was really, I almost had this moment of like dissociating during watching that debate, because it's just like, is this guy serious? Like, it's just, we all know what the reality is. We've been talking about this endlessly. And he's just like, no, we're actually doing really well. It's actually everything going great. We're hitting those targets. And it's like, yeah, you're right. I had that exact same feeling. Like, was something wrong with me? It's weird. But
But
these are evil politicians.
Now, Nora, I know that you are a keen observer of politics, but I also know that you like to practice self-care. And so I'm wondering, did you watch any of the French or the singular English debates, or did you just kind of check out and hang out with your kids and just have a nice evening? What did you do?
Hanging out with kids is fucking boring, so I didn't do that. Yeah, no, the debates kept on falling on nights of my soccer games, and so fucking mercifully, I didn't really have to watch. I missed the first two French ones. The main French one was we had a massive power outage that knocked out power for all of downtown Quebec City, from the fucking St. Lawrence to the St. Charles River, which is just like the whole swath of the downtown. And so instead it was like I went outside and found out my neighbors were having a party, and so we kind of hung outside for a bit in the darkness, which was sweet.
For an atheist, these kinds of acts of God are just sort of like, I don't even understand, but that's fantastic. So, but
as a sovereigntist, I could say it was probably Hydro-Quebec being like, fuck yeah, like they don't need to be watching this tonight.
Fair enough.
So, but I did catch an hour of it, and then I miscalculated the English debate. I thought I was gonna miss an hour because of soccer, and then I got home and I was like, oh, it actually started for Vancouver time or BC time later, so I ended up watching the whole debate. Debates are they are pageantry, they are performance. I found out that one of my biggest political enemies of all fucking time is on the Federal Debates Commission, which was a huge shock because this guy has literally no experience with debates. Like I knew he was a liberal, but I didn't think he was that level of a fucking liberal. And it's like, oh, this all makes sense. They have literally, he replaced Craig Kielburger, who also had no fucking business being there, but at least Craig Kielburger makes sense. This guy makes literally no sense. He works for the admin at Ryerson because he fucked us, and his reward was this plum position that he's still been milking the last decade.
So I mean, and this has been like a political campaign where you really see the sort of oatmeal brain of mainstream political leadership and just how they're running this, because it's been appalling from the get-go. And Rob, I mean, I understand you were quite sickened, like physically sickened when the writ dropped in the middle of August. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the reaction like from Clockwork Orange, just like it's a physical reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has come back to the debate and to the that liberal climate plan, the segment where you had Trudeau sort of pinning Singh to the ropes, saying, "How come they're giving your climate plan an F and they give ours like an A- or whatever?" And I think that like the most insidious and brilliant thing that the liberals did was they got these economists to rank their plan based on feasibility or sincerity. You had Mark Jacquard, who's like Christy Clark's ex-boyfriend in BC, who invented this new metric, which he called sincerity, which is basically like, given the constraints on the world as it is, how possible is it to achieve your extremely modest goals? And so the way that it works is like the lower you set the bar against the sort of backdrop of those neoliberal constraints, the higher you rank in sincerity, because that is achievable, as opposed to what the NDP proposed, which is considered less achievable because of the constraints of capital. And so that was the metric. And of course, by that metric, like the liberals are always going to have the most sincere platform because they only promise you slightly more than what they actually think is possible to deliver. And you saw that same acceptance of the framing in the question from the polling firm, the Shachi Curl, who was moderating the debate, who's like a pollster, where she asked the first question about climate and said, Canada needs pipelines to ensure a transition to green energy. Given that, who do you think is best to lead, right? And throws it back to the leaders. And so both in the debate structure and in the whole conversation around the climate plans and the liberal platform, we are being told to accept the fact that there are these immutable things which we cannot change and which result in very, very few choices. And then within those handcuffs, who can actually tweak or fiddle with the system in ways that we rank as sincere. And I think that that's like the biggest trap that a lot of progressives and climate folks have fallen into. And because they don't have a working class or a left-wing analysis, I've seen a ton of like my colleagues in the climate movement just come out and be like, well, I guess Justin Trudeau's got the best plan. I never thought I'd be the one saying this. He did buy a pipeline. I was kind of upset about that. But now, when I put it up against these other plans, it's the most sincere.
The sincerity thing is so interesting because I remember when Justin Trudeau came out with, when they canceled their their promise to do electoral reform. He was like flat-footed for like a few days, but then when he really got his game back on, when he was like, we realized that this would be bad for the country, bad for unity, and actually, if we have to choose between unity and keeping our promise, we're going to choose unity, and like really believed what he was saying. It was incredible, like this incredible performance. And I think that when the liberals really just double down on things that are totally like upside down, and that's when they're at their best. And I think that's what we've really seen on display is Trudeau just really drinking his own Kool-Aid and just being like, yeah, like this is the best plan. And sincerity is the perfect word. It's like we're the most sincere, like of all the words, sincere. Of all the words to apply to yourself, or to I mean, it's just genius. It's next level sort of gas.
Well, that kind of sociopathy, I mean, if you believe your lies, then they're true. It doesn't matter.
George Costanza said that famously. It's not a lie if you believe it, Jerry. It's important. If you're in politics, you have to remember this lesson.
You're absolutely right. Oh my God. Nora, is it true that the Liberal Party have been pulling a Costanza on us the last 6 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna answer that question.
No.
You know what? I was a huge Seinfeld fan, and I literally cannot reach back into my Seinfeld knowledge to come up with a good response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the question is, do they believe the lies, or do they know they're lying?
I don't think it matters.
Question.
It doesn't know, but it doesn't matter, right? Like
doesn't.
they are serial liars, and they are high manipulators, and they understand the system better than fucking anyone else. And this is where the big problem comes with the NDP, because the NDP acts as if they know the system, and they do not. They do not have inside access to capital. They do not have inside access to the people who call the shots within this country, and the Liberals do. And so the Liberals have that benefit of being able to always position themselves as being enlightened, progressive, reasonable, or, you know, the words we are using tonight, sincere, when actually all it is that they just have access to capital. They serve capital. Everything that they do is for capital. I do think, though, that it's very interesting in this election that of all things, the debates were relevant. Like the way, at least, and this is like from the Quebec perspective, but the way the English language debate like solely changed the fucking way people are voting in this province is pretty interesting. And I don't recall debates being talked about in the way that the English language debate has been talked about for so much longer after it happened. Like when Sandy and I recorded last week on Sunday night, the debate, of course, happened on Thursday night, and we were like, fuck, this is still news. Whereas usually it's like, okay, we had the debates, it was boring, this is what happened in the end. And I think that that's probably due to the fact that aside from the content problems with the debate, which we've all fucking talked about, Trudeau showed himself to be a fucking baby child, like just this very shrill, angry, fists clenched, stomping his feet, shitting himself, like fucking baby, right? And I think that that's not how English Canada talked about the debate. Really, they really focused, like, I mean, English and French Canada focused a lot on that question from Chachi Krill at the beginning to Yves-François Blanchet. But I think that the anger and the petulance, which is a word a lot of people have used to describe Trudeau, really came across. And I think that actually had a big impact that people have not named enough.
Well, it's the sense of entitlement, right? It's like, obviously their numbers internally had to have looked pretty good for them to call this election in the first place. And just nothing really turned out the way that they wanted. I mean, it looks like it's not as quite the nightmare scenario that it was maybe shaping up to be. But I mean, it's a strong likelihood that we might end up pretty much exactly where we started with this election. Maybe it's completely pointless, which makes it even more painful.
Yeah.
But that's it. You got the sense from Trudeau that he's got this element of frustration that this like kind of somewhat devious plan, this power grab that he was hoping for, was just completely blowing up in his face.
Yeah.
And he responded by lashing out a lot towards a lot of people.
Well, the nice thing about when you touch a hot stove, though, is that sometimes you fucking burn your fingers, which is what we're also seeing with the rise of the PPC. Who thought it would happen? Nobody thought it would happen. Why would it happen? Nobody could have predicted that. Fucking liberals. So now we're seeing this explosion in another kind of entitlement, which is the entitlement to storm hospitals, break into schools. I think I saw in BC. just like really aggressive anti-vaccine sentiment. And I mean, like, to be human about it, everybody lost their minds in the last year and a half. So like, it's okay. Like, I understand that people are crazy.
Not me, I'm totally normal. So
like, except for Rob. Rob, you've done a really
mostly
good job
everyone, though.
keeping an even keel.
Rob has enhanced his mind over the last 18 months.
Exactly,
Rob is
yeah.
role
It's
Growing
modeling
only larger
That
and
mustache.
stronger.
balance. Yeah.
You can tell the mustache is like
Yeah.
good, right?
It's a
Yeah.
great stash, Rob. But yes, but we're just seeing fuck around and find out. Like, I didn't think it could happen, and now it is happening.
Okay.
So Kai, let's
So-
talk about that. Yeah.
There is a cause and effect to discuss here, because Rob talked about this kind of like clever little power grab. And what did Trudeau do 2 days before dropping the writs? He announced the vaccine mandate for travelers and for 300,000 federal employees. And he knew that that would wrong foot the Conservatives. The whole idea was to be able to paint the Conservatives as anti-vax. Subsequent polling actually shows that because Conservatives are selfish boomers, they're actually less likely to harbor anti-vaccine sentiments. They want their vaccine. But Trudeau's assumption was that he could then go after O'Toole throughout the campaign by saying, oh, you haven't even made your own caucus members get vaccinated, and so you're never going to support the vaccine mandate, and that's the only way through this pandemic and getting back to normal. So that was his pitch. And what I don't think they calculated on, or maybe they did, maybe they're even more devious than I thought, was that, you know, this would immediately pump the tires of the PPC, because there's only one political home for the people who are hardcore anti-vaccine, and that would steal votes from the Conservatives. And, you know, if the Conservatives are kept out of plurality on Monday night, it'll probably be in part because of people migrating from their party to the PPC. But that's not all. That's not the only people that joined the People's Party.
And I actually don't even think it's that many people from the
It's not. It's not. And like I said, the Conservatives want their vaccine. The People's Party attracted people from the nebulous pool of non-voters, from the 40% or 30% of Canadians who just don't fucking participate in elections. And what do they have in common? They all believe that they're going to lose their jobs because they don't want to get the vaccine. And I don't know about you, but if you talk to people who work with their hands for a living, or you talk to people outside of the urban centers, there's a lot of people who consider it a personal choice what they stick in their body, or they're just not convinced by the effectiveness, or they feel like a contrarian. And then when the government says, well, you have to get it or you're going to lose your job, it ignites this oppositional defiance, which is fueling this migration to the People's Party. When they get to the People's Party, a bunch of these folks who happen to be like, a lot of them live in the Kootenays or Vancouver Island, you know, they're like organic food people. And when they get to the PPC, they're fed this like horse pill of anti-immigrant racism, of like just insane internet conspiracy theories. And they are like radicalized towards right-wing violence. And so we have people now who literally are not afraid to die, who are so fucking selfish that they don't care about anybody else around them. You can't appeal to them on the basis of like herd immunity or you know, some kind of public
Society,
good.
yeah.
And they're willing to fucking attack hospitals and schools, and they have the cops on their side. So this doesn't go anywhere good, because you can't suppress that through traditional means. You can't coerce them. You know, the vaccine mandate has created this, and further attempts at suppression, I think, are just going to push people towards crazier and crazier acts of self-expression. And that is, to my mind, possibly the most damaging legacy of this election campaign.
Exactly. Yes, because that's, yeah, not to be a dick, but it's like you need this crucible in order for something like that to really explode. So like, I wasn't confident that we'd have our own sort of MAGA chud, like real MAGA chud militancy until the last 6 weeks when we've seen this playing out. Drew,
this has really been brewing throughout the pandemic, though, right? We saw the Adamson barbecue stuff. I mean, this whole pandemic has provided a great excuse for this kind of nascent far-right movement that I think I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop on this for years now. I've been waiting for this movement to begin. We saw it really begin in America with the Trump era. And I've just been waiting, you know, we are always following these political trends from the States. I've just been waiting for this movement to come up. Mm-hmm. And this pandemic has just provided the perfect excuse for that. It's been happening throughout the pandemic and in increasing severity. And now adding this element of the vaccines and the vaccine mandates on top of that has just given them this like rallying cry to go around. And like Kyle, like you're pointing out, many of these people are sort of far right people. But in terms of this movement, also like the whole anti-vax movement started with this kind of like the crystal, healing hippie sort of crowd. And so it's this really weird mishmash of different people from different disparate political beliefs that are getting funneled into this incredibly reactionary movement.
The stat that really stood out for me was there was a pollster who asked, who asked like whether people agree with the following statement: "We are on the verge of a revolution in our society to take our freedom back from governments who are limiting it." And that was like 32% of people nationwide responded positively to that, but like 84% of PPC like supporters supported that. So you're seeing like this really like zealous, if I dare say that word, you know,
it's a family show, Drew. Can you keep it? We don't work blue here. Sorry.
kind of belief,
yeah.
You know, in what they're doing. And I think what we're seeing is the sort of, you know, I think it's pretty standard at this point to observe that like there's a collapse in belief in institutions, whether it's media or government and so on. Like people just don't buy it anymore. But I think that the other layer to that is that there's a collapse in the sort of belief in solidarity, because there's been a collapse in the sort of more local institutions, which would you know, like union locals, you know, labor councils, Council of Canadians chapters, whatever it is, that could sort of filter the world in a way that actually makes sense to people on the ground. Whereas I think now, because there's like the media is dying out in rural areas, because labor is being deorganized, civil society is being deorganized by the rise of NGOs. I think like actively depoliticized NGOs to a certain
local
extent.
media has been destroyed by social media as well. People getting news through Facebook instead of local journalism now.
Yes, so that whole idea of a public. I think where you're going with this, Drew, is like there isn't really a we left to appeal to, right? And so when you look at, go ahead, Nora.
No, go ahead, finish.
There's a study that's being done at Concordia that has interviewed 100,000 people around the world about their motivations for getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine. And what they find is that the reasons that people get the vaccine are still motivated by this sense of the public good, right? It's less about like, oh, my individual risks. It's about, you know, I want to protect the people around me, or I have elderly relatives or disabled people that I don't want to infect. The people who are refusing the vaccine, it's all about their own self-interest, and it's about, you know, is this effective and safe? That's sort of like the generous interpretation of vaccine hesitancy, or like, I just don't fucking want it, and nobody gets to tell me that I have to do this because there is no society and I don't know anything to anybody around me. And that is a view that has been like, it's not a surprise that people feel that way. That's been cultivated in them since like Reagan and Thatcher and before.
Right.
And so the governments, in their appeal to get people vaccinated, you know, they use this rhetoric around like the collective and the, you know, the public health benefits and this idea of a we, but really it's about coercion at the end of the day. Like the big businesses, the big employers, they want people back at work. They want to go back to normal. And so, you know, the governments can trot out, you know, sympathetic public health doctors to say it's all about, you know, keeping grandma safe. But really, if you don't get with the program, there is this coercive, you know, hand behind the velvet glove. And so the people that are now reacting to that, I wish they were like critiquing this from a left-wing perspective. Like I wish that people were saying, actually, like eroding our privacy rights and coercing us as individuals in order to fulfill this, you know, big pharma, big business agenda, that's fuck you. And if that was the basis for which people were criticizing the vaccine mandates, you know, I might be able to get on board. And instead, it's the people who are even more hyper individualistic, who are even more selfish, that are the ones that are saying we're on the verge of a revolution, and they're the ones that are like bringing the anti-government fire right now. And it's so sad to see, because you know, that should be us. That should be that should be the left. That's like actually destabilizing and frightening governments and pushing back on their agenda. And instead, we're just so beaten down that the only people who can like muster a serious destabilizing political response to the liberals right now are like insane, violent people.
Nora, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nora.
I think like let's not undercount though the difference in how provincial responses have like reformulated social solidarity. Right? It is not a coincidence that the most vaccinated province is Quebec, followed by the Atlantic provinces, and of course the territories. That's not a coincidence. And it was, you know, there still are notions of social solidarity in Quebec. The government has largely divested its decision making to public health, for better or for worse. But you know, There was no hiccups in the vaccine rollout. There were no hiccups in a lot of how Quebec managed this. And the hiccups that existed were kind of what you would expect normally. There was none of this like fucking go to Twitter to find your vaccine appointment. Like that's insanity, right? Everyone in Quebec just put their postal code in a fucking website and we're told what date they can book it, then they booked it, right? And so like that leaves us in Quebec, at least from like the experience that I have, the people I know who are not getting vaccinated, only like 2 of maybe 15 people I know who've not been vaccinated yet are actually anti-vaxxers. The rest are just like, oh yeah, shit, I gotta do that, or oh fuck, I can't play soccer if I don't have my vaccine. And most of them are like under the age of 22, right? So then it's just a whole other kind of interaction that you have with this pandemic, and interaction that you have with the people that are impacted the most, which, you know, it's totally normal that they wouldn't necessarily have elderly friends, right? Or even elderly relatives. The people I'm thinking are all immigrants actually, and so their elderly relatives don't live here, right? They live somewhere else. So I think that that's something to keep in mind. And like the overemphasis on the anti-vax movements, like we have to keep our heads straight on this, because the reality is that there's a lot of missing people in the vaccine numbers just because of mismanagement from provincial governments. And if we bring this back to the federal election, like let's not forget where we were when this election was called. The fourth wave was obvious, but no one saw the fourth wave coming. Certainly Trudeau did not think it was going to be as bad as it was when he called this election. I think that is clear. He would not have called it had he thought that. And you know, and people can see it's a cynical power grab, and so they're kind of like fed up with it. But what I'm very interested in is the question of how limited speech is in this country, and how impossible it is to have a left-wing perspective in any of the mainstream media outlets. And by refusing to allow a left-wing perspective beyond what the NDP offers, and even them, obviously, it's a bit restricted too, it just leaves it wide open for the far right, right? Just the fucking red carpet for the far right. So obviously, like people that I know who are like isolated, who have no local media, they're just gonna rail against the fucking how terrible Trudeau is and how much we all hate him, like as we all agree, and they're gonna just come up with like fill their own fucking their own like way to explain all of this, right?
Nora, I want to pull it back to like just I guess what Kai was talking about with how we've had 35 years of just like the left completely degenerating. And so with this kind of rebuilding, since we have so many cool people on this final panel for this telethon that we did today, I kind of want to just like be a little optimistic, I guess, because it's like even 3 years ago when you guys launched Sandy and Nora, I don't feel like Five? Okay. So right, like 5 years ago, I don't feel like things were quite in the zeitgeist in the same way. The Breach launching 5 months ago was just like, you know, a super professional, like really hot, like great looking, high quality, deep, rich, anchored or news organization. Like, I mean, that stuff just, it kind of feels like there is a growth happening, and that can correct and renormalize like good ways to think about society. So I mean, obviously it sucks, and we have like a rising PPC and terrible government, and an NDP that disappoints us a lot. But it kind of feels like maybe, you know, we're part of a shift happening. And Drew, am I is that Pollyannish, or is that maybe is there some accuracy to that?
I mean, I definitely think there's a shift happening. It's just a question of really understanding where we are, you know, in that phase. I think we're still in a deeply inchoate phase of the left resurgence. You know, clearly there's the material conditions have changed. There's a whole generation of people who are completely open to those ideas, even if they're not super developed in them, you know, through the kind of personal experiences that formed, you know, people, probably most of us. But yeah, we're not at the point where we can, for example, have institutions that can invest in, I don't know, labor organizing or progressive organizing or climate organizing or anything in like rural areas, for example. Like we're still completely ceding the terrain to sort of toxic online media and corporate funded, you know, disinformation campaigns in those areas. And that's why you're seeing, I think that's a big part of why you're seeing sorry, rural areas and also suburban areas. But that's why you're seeing that terrain has been completely ceded, and I don't think we're anywhere close to starting to take it back. But that said, in the urban centers, like there is the potential for a critical mass that could start to build some institutional capacity. At what that's going to look like, is anybody's guess. And I think there's a lot of experimentation going on, but I don't, nobody's come up with the magic solution. But I think the key is to keep trying to find ways to build those institutions that can, in the next 10 years, start to rebuild that social fabric that's been completely destroyed.
Which I think it's just good to be sort of positive and optimistic. I'm reading what's her name, Judy Rebick's 10,000 Roses, which is a history of the feminist movement in.
I hope you've read my book first, because it just summarizes that one.
Oh yeah. Well, no, my mom had a copy of this book. She didn't have a copy of your book yet, but I'll get it for her birthday. Probably that's a good idea. Actually, I should. Yeah. But just reading the book has given, I like to read history books when life is stressful or when society sucks, because having that scope kind of helps anchor emotional reactions to things. And just reading about the long march of history and how deeply fucked up it was in so many ways for women and for people with disabilities and everything. Not that it isn't now, but it was worse then, right? And so just reading about progress and how that checks in with history just kind of gives me feelings of hope or whatever. I don't know, Rob, is that so crazy?
I don't think it's crazy. I mean, it's certainly better than just feeling pessimistic and feeling like there's nothing we can do. I mean, as propaganda to show in the chat is saying, what can the left do to be more inviting to people otherwise lured by the PPC? This is the problem that I think we're faced with also is because we're living in the result of 40 years of neoliberalism that has destroyed all these public institutions. I mean, there's been a concerted effort to completely wipe out any semblance of the left at all from our public discourse, from our institutions. And that's a big challenge, even people that view themselves as being kind of free thinkers, they've internalized this propaganda that we don't have these answers. And yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's just really important to point out as we go forward with this decades of a very concerted effort to ensure that these are the only kind of viewpoints that are allowed, these only acceptable viewpoints. That's the inevitable result. And that's the kind of thing that I can't wrap my mind around with some of these PPC people. These people that are so obsessed with government control. We're seeing how they're really rallying around this idea of I won't be told what to do by the government. I won't be controlled I won't be told what to do by the government. But they're totally they don't even consider the idea that private interests control them so much more at every level. Why do you have to get up every day to go to a job in order to have a home, in order to eat, in order to feed your family? You've got private social media companies tracking your every move and everything you say. They've totally accepted and internalized this idea of private control over every facet of their lives. But they think the problem is the government, and the problem is the government trying to give you medicine, or the government trying to give you the means to be able to take care of your family. But that's how much they've internalized this idea that that's dangerous and terrible,
But it's not just the government, right? I think that there's a special mix of it being Trudeau, right? Trudeau is such a fucking liability in trying to get people to not want to murder their prime minister, right? He's so murderable.
Jesus.
For all the fucking cops
in video games. In a video game, that's a parody. Nora's doing a parody.
I've not even murdered a single person, right? So
okay, Nora, can I let me unpack that for a sec, because I think what you're saying is just that
let's not get banned with the final 15 minutes of this 12-hour.
No, let's get banned. That'd be a great way to finish.
No.
He attracts ire. There's something about the man that's he's such a douche that every right-wing asshole.
You can feel that he's a fucking rich piece of shit guy that you would probably want to avoid at a party, right?
And his sort of just toxic way of being in the last 6 years. Yeah, well, it's if Harper caused every centrist lib and person of the left to recoil over his 9 years in government, Trudeau creates a similar thing for just people who react to a certain unctuous kind of slimy liberal. So Nora, maybe a nicer way of saying it is just that part of the anger is because of the person who is at the top, and it makes him a target, and it makes it just for shitty discourse and a shitty a shitty political moment in our society.
This is how I describe it. And Drew, I'm just going to guess here that you're also thinking that he's making the vaccines a wedge issue. And one other wedge issue, and I think maybe you'll want to pick up on what I'm about to say, but there was so little analysis on how in 2015 Trudeau used immigration as the wedge issue to get elected, right? And he did it so cynically. And it was racist, right? The number of Haitian and Nigerian refugees being denied versus Syrian refugees being accepted. I mean, all of this is out there. It's very public. And then, of course, what does he do? He goes on to increase deportations, right? He turns immigration on and off like a fucking tap. And the moment that he turns it on in January 2017, is he twigs something in the mind of the murderer in Quebec City to go into a mosque and kill 6 people. And this is someone who'd been planning a mass murder since he was 16 years old. He almost tried to do the mass murder at a mall where it's just going to be random and shooting people in November of that year. And it wasn't until Trudeau publicly turning on that tap on immigration that he twigs in the mind of this piece of shit far right guy. And
also Donald Trump at the rising at the same time, and the whole rise of the alt-right media in the US as well.
It was all of that, but literally, if you read the court transcripts, it was Trudeau's tweet that made him go, I'm taking action tomorrow. And I think that we really need to think through the role that the liberal brand, the role that this kind of absolutely cynical and violent expression of progressive politics is actually like so fucked up. And there's no left-wing analysis of this. The right-wing analysis of it is like, yeah, fuck him and all these violent threats and all this like making politics more toxic and all this kind of stuff. But no one on the left was unpacking that and saying, this is the connection between what happens when you play with people's lives, what happens when you play with racism, you play with immigration in this way, and then this is the natural result of that. And instead it was like, no, he was able to, comes to the memorial every year and they're fighting hatred and they have no shame on any of this stuff. So and he has no idea how to respond to this either.
Nora, once again, just to be a little bit positive, if I may, one interesting thing about this election is that incredibly, when he did like 1 million blackfaces and it came out, that didn't tank him. But this election, I mean, the luster is so clearly gone. If he's lucky, I think probably if he's lucky, he'll get a reduced minority. Who knows? Who the fuck knows? But whatever. So like, the guy could be out the door in a couple of years, and then we're going to be in a new period of Canadian politics, which means whatever comes next is going to be interesting. And so I think it's good to be like pulling up these things. But Trudeau's going to be in our rearview mirror soon enough. And then we'll just be mad at Chrystia Freeland or fucking Mark Carney or some other dumbass.
Woke girl boss Prime Minister Freeland. That's what I'm talking about. Hell yeah.
Christ, yeah, Freeland. I can't imagine a better name for a Canadian Prime Minister.
Yeah, boy, I like that. Ooh, Drew, I like that. Yeah, Drew, do you like that? That's a good one, eh?
I think what I would describe happening is a fragmentation. Not so much like even like a rebuilding of the left, but there's a fragmentation where, up until maybe 9/11, there was kind of a shared reality, right? Like you watch the same news channels and people sort of agreed generally on like the shape of reality. And then there's people who read the Weekly World News at Safeway. But for the most part, there was a sense that there was like a shared culture and a shared set of references. And what we've seen is this kind of fragmentation coinciding with the rise of the internet, where people who don't accept the official narrative can go to a number of different places to try to find their own sort of values and views validated. And that is the opportunity for left media, is to basically try to find people who feel like shit and to explain that that's actually normal and we all feel like shit and here's why. And to sort of start building a parasocial or a social relationship with people around this shared sense of experience. But there's a couple of obstacles to that. One of them is that most of the people who are doing the heavy lifting for the left are personally insulated from the gig economy and from a lot of the most insidious aspects of the economy over the last 20 years. Like a lot of people they have a spouse who makes decent money, or they have a union job, or they have an academic position, and that allows them to it affords them the distance to be able to analyze what's going on. But they don't necessarily have the lived experience of just getting fucking crushed by that machine day in, day out. And so there are some people, I mean, I really love Badrino, if that's how I pronounce it, on Twitter. because he's like a proud blue collar guy who's dealing with like unbelievable shit in his personal life and streams about politics because that's his perspective. And so I think we need, let 1,000 Padrinos bloom, I would say, because otherwise we are, as you say, seeding those people to the ball breathing YouTube channels, which lead directly through the algorithm to the PPC. And because the media landscape is so fucking fragmented, you can just take whatever you want and sort of follow that rabbit hole. Unfortunately, because of who is in charge, the pool table's tilted, right? And so if you just sort of randomly keep clicking through a bunch of alternative takes on what's going on in the world, you end up back at the far right crazy shit, the stuff that the cops are not monitoring, but they are not worried about. Whereas we have a harder job because we have to build an audience up, swimming upstream against the sort of machine censorship of the social media algorithms, and also just this total blackout in mainstream media. And there's no validation, there's no echo chamber, because you're never going to hear that perspective on CBC at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so it has to be almost entirely built outside of that existing system and pushing back against surveillance and like I said, machine censorship. So it's I'm trying to be positive here. I think that there's an opportunity here. There's an audience. There's a lot of people who feel like shit, who need some analysis, who need an explanation of why, and who are like fundamentally decent people and don't want to hurt other people. And so hopefully we'll reject a politics that requires them to actually hurt other people. But we're running out of time to find those people and assemble them.
And since we're running out of time in this segment and in this telethon, Kai, I'm really happy that you introduced kind of like the idea of media, but also some like good vibes to kind of wrap this up. So starting there, Drew, can you pick up on that with this idea of sort of, I don't know, just like leaning into the importance of doing the kind of work that we do, and maybe specifically with the Breach, and maybe even specifically with what the Breach will be doing on election eve. What's going to be happening at the Breach?
Yeah, so I'll get the plug out of the way, but we've got an amazing lineup of people who are going to be commenting for from 8 p.m. Eastern to midnight on election night, including Nora.
4 hours? 4 hours? Is that all?
That's it. That's
amateurs.
It.
I'm just joking. Sorry.
That's all we got.
Sorry. Please continue. No, I'm so psyched. So please continue. It's an amazing lineup.
So Nora will be there. Rob will be there. We got Elle Jones. We got Naomi Klein. We got Pam Palmater. A bunch of other people.
Luke Savage, I think, is going to be there.
Luke Savage will be there. Riley Esno, Martin Lukács. Anyway, I guess we'll put the link in the chat if one of you would oblige me. But yeah, in terms of the media, I mean, I think the left is really, I mean, we have to hit it from all angles, and I certainly think that what Kai was saying is spot on. I think another sort of issue the left has, and this is a positive quality because we really believe in solidarity, but it's also brings in our sort of middle class culture, which is also sort of what Kai was referring to, which is that we want everybody to be 100% on every issue that we believe in. And so if somebody comes in with like who has like 7 out of 10, boxes checked in terms of having the right line about about different political issues or different sort of identity issues, and so on, and haven't quite figured it out on the other 3, then there's a tendency to sort of reject those people. And I think they're totally legitimate things, because people are going to say, like, it comes down to you don't believe that this section of the population is actually human, basically, which might actually even be true in a lot of cases. I mean, in a lot of cases it is true, but we have to find that sort of flexibility to have people enter the zone where they're still learning and not be sort of rejected. And I think that's a real challenge for the left, because we really do. I think a lot of people are acting out of a real legitimate and sincere, if I'm allowed to use that word anymore, desire for to be in solidarity and have a comprehensive affirmation of the humanity of everybody around them. But yeah, we need to figure out how to create space for people to still be learning, but still be coming closer to the movements that we want to build, and become completely mainstream.
But I see that happening, and like again, Nora, with like the work that you guys have been doing, you and Sandy just have been like educating and normalizing ideas and perspectives that were not on the table 5 years. Like, I mean, like, so yeah, can you kind of pick up and maybe be a little like objectively positive about the work that you guys do and like and its importance for maybe normalizing the left in this country, so-called country. Sorry.
Yeah. So a girl I went to high school with sends me a message yesterday, and she says, "Oh my God, my work wife found out that I know you, and she like can't believe it, and you're famous." And I was like, I mean, I hope you told her that I'm fucking not cool. And she's like, I showed her all the pictures. And we get this a lot, actually. Like the reach that the podcast has had has been very surprising. And it's of a very specific demographic. I mean, we have a lot of different kinds of people that listen to us, but by and large, it's like very young to 25 years old. And that and people are in touch with us a lot, asking to think through political questions. How do I strategically, I mean, I just got one today. How do I strategically deal with the fact that this show has hired someone who sexually assaulted me, right? Really basic stuff. And trying to help people navigate that. So it is interesting. I'm not confident that like even a version of my show that would be 10 times as popular can take on a lot of the problems that we're talking about. But what has been very interesting is that people are desperate for analysis, and they're desperate for something that is not what they're getting anywhere else. And I think that the longer form discussion, and I'm sure that you're seeing this on lots of shows within the network, that longer form discussion through political difficult ideas, I think is exactly where people are and where they need to be. But education is just a part of it. And I think that education is frankly the easier part of it, because we have so much history and so much experience in how to educate. What's far more difficult is organizing under neoliberalism. And I'll end with mentioning, so you mentioned 10,000 Roses by Judy Rebick. The thing that makes that book really fun, like interesting, is it's just a script of people who lived it, right? There's not
an oral history, yeah.
It's an oral history. There's not, Judy's writing it's not the writing. It's actually just stringing together people's voices and they lived through this stuff. And the conditions to organize were so much different back then, right? Like getting on EI and being paid by the state to then organize for free and doing all this kind of creative stuff that you could with the welfare state. And I really do have a problem thinking through how we replicate any of that with like on fumes, running on complete fucking fumes, right? Sandy and Nora is like now actually giving us a little bit of money. I mean, we still have to save a lot because we have to hire someone. God, like we're just at the end of our fucking capacities. But it's got to go way beyond that, and it has to go beyond education, because I think that we stop a lot of the time with education and awareness, and it's just not enough.
Rob, can you pick up from there? but Nora, thank you. Yeah, so I hear that loudly and clearly. Rob, can you give, as we really are at just the last few minutes here of this 12-hour telethon, can you give a few kind words about the some of the good work being done, and maybe the positive things and some nice things?
Yeah.
Anything at all as we approach the witching hour?
Just to add on to what Nora was just saying, there is absolutely an appetite for this kind of analysis. And as Kai pointed out, there's all kinds of roadblocks in terms of getting this out of there. The social media websites, the mainstream media that are completely allergic to presenting these kinds of viewpoints. But there's a huge, huge appetite for it. I mean, I know this better than anyone. Like the amount of people that I've been able to reach through Twitter, through podcasts, and through doing this Twitch stream. I do these Twitch streams like 12 hours a week now, and I have a really great community that comes here each and every day that I do the stream to hang out and talk about all these issues and talk through all these things. So I really know that like this appetite is out there, and that there's plenty of people, especially young people, that don't want to go into this far right direction and want this kind of analysis and just aren't getting it. And of course media isn't the be all and end all. Like there needs to be organizing, there needs to be activism, there needs to be direct action, all this, of course. But I do feel very strongly, though, the media is a strong, important component of that. Certainly one lesson that I think I learned in 2019, 2020, following very closely the Jeremy Corbyn campaign and the Bernie Sanders campaign, really showed how much more there was to do, how much power the media has in controlling what people think and what they do. And I thought maybe this was coming into a time when these big kind of popular left-wing movements that were kind of breaking through on an electoral level might start to challenge that. And in each case, you saw the media come together to ensure that these movements could not progress any further than they did. Mm-hmm. And so, that's how I know that it's important, because they wouldn't spend, capitalists wouldn't spend billions and billions of dollars on controlling these institutions if it wasn't important, because they really do control what people think and believe. So I know we're on the right track. I know there's an appetite for it. And that's kind of how I feel, is that I do think that just the fact that there's such a desire on the part of people to get this kind of analysis is going to just lead to good things as we all can kind of continue to do this work. We all continue to pull in this kind of maybe not always the same direction, but a similar direction. And I think ultimately this is what the is going to be. It's going to be a really important part of the pushback over the next 10, 15 years to whatever is coming. And I think we all sense kind of something a little bit dark on the horizon. And that's what kind of gives me hope personally, is just being able to work at something and kind of build something together, like what we've done with Harbinger Media Network, what we're trying to do at The Breach. And just, I feel like it's really important. It's going to hopefully lead to good things, and it's hopefully going to be one component of the pushback to whatever is coming over the next couple of years, along with, of course, lots more direct action, lots more activism, and that stuff as well.
And the arc of history is long, but it bends towards a very slow motion apocalypse, I think is the...
I believe that's how that goes, yeah.
And I just want to say one thing, and then we're going to wrap. But honestly, like, some of it's also the kind of badass cool factor, because there's a little bit punk rock aspect to a lot of the left-wing independent media that we have included on this panel tonight. And so I think that's actually pretty rad. So yeah, wonderful. Rob Rousseau, the host of the titular Rob Rousseau Show. Nora Loreto, Sandy and Nora of Sandy and Nora fame, author of Take Back the Fight, which will be a podcast at the Harbinger Network launching in October. Drew Ojiche, publisher of The Breach, executive director of CUTV, and the host of Half Past Capitalism. Nagata, member of our board of directors. Thank you so much, you guys. This has been awesome. We made it 12 hours. This has been really cool.
Yes, and I really, before we sign off here, obviously, I want to, of course, I also thank Kellingspree and Lodane for all the work that they did today, modding the chat and helping out. Really, really vital. We couldn't have done it without you. We also could not have done it without
our producer Nahum Mann, who
our
was
producer,
absolutely spectacular, and including Nahum, it was 40 fucking people on this telethon today. 40 people, which is really incredible, considering that like all of them are super cool and wonderful. And it's been,
I'm like kind of amazed that we pulled this off. Frankly.
We did it,
and an incredible range of stuff. I might add, there was. Yeah, there was chill vibes, there was great analysis, there was topless husbands, there was all kinds of stuff, great stuff going on.
Hillary's husband just couldn't wear a top because of his tattoo. It was just like very normal behavior.
I just want to say congratulations to all of you on the excellent work, and it's really amazing to see the whole sort of community come together and show the kind of solidarity that's possible. I think it's a really great seed that I'm expecting to grow into wonderful things in the future.
And I think next planned is sort of mid-December live reading of A Christmas Carol as a community, which I think will be really, really fun.
Sure.
So we'll do some live theater then. You guys, let's wrap it up. Thank you. Kai, any last words?
I just want to say thank you to all the young people that I see who are engaging in radical acts of solidarity with Indigenous communities, taking their land back, with unhoused people that are facing the truncheons of the Toronto police. These are the kids that inspire me. I feel old now within this movement, such as it is. And yeah, take the analysis, take the ideas that you're excited about, and the podcasts you've been listening to in your lonely pandemic months, and put those into action. Build relationships with people in the real world around you, whether or not they're 10 out of 10 on the good politics scale, and help each other out, because those are the folks that are going to fucking save your ass when the PPC guys try to drag you into the street.
Nora, you want to give us an election benediction?
Benediction? I mean, yeah, hail Trudeau, full of grace.
That's basically the point we've been trying to make throughout this. I think people can pick
I
that
think
up.
so. Yeah.
My prediction, it's going to be conservative minority.
Whoa.
Wow, okay.
You heard it here first, folks. Oh my God.
I see.
Well, we've actually booked, I was joking with the Christmas Carol, we booked a second 12-hour telethon the day after the election, leading into the
Wonderful.
breach 4 hours. So it's going to be 16 hours.
Yeah.
More piss jugs next time.
Tomorrow during the day is the best time of the election, right? Where you're just like, cool, like journalism is fucking stopped.